Hey guys, welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study, a plain and simple book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse study through the entire Bible. We are in the book of Lamentations, chapter 3. I stopped, uh, besides that chapter 3 is an extremely long chapter, okay? But there was a thought that the writer brought out as, again, remember, this is, the Lamentations is expressing grief. It is expressing grief from two points of view. From God's point of view, as He is looking at His people, as He's looking at His people, and their suffering. And then it's also from the perspective of the fallen people, the fallen Jerusalem, as they're suffering. Okay, so you have those two points of views. And then what I wanted to point out here is when you have people who are suffering, and this is sometimes what reveals the true nature. There are people that can do good deeds, and I'm using that in a very, very wide net. So in other words, why do people go to church every Sunday to do good deeds? Because they think they're achieving something before God. Okay, and then of course until something happens where they don't like it, then they get mad at God. Right? You have people who say, "Well, I'm mad at God. I no longer believe in God." Yada yada yada. The point is, so the good deeds were only a front. What was always in their heart shows how they react, even in times, harsh times. I've seen people who, you know, lost loved ones, right? Whoever the loved ones are. So what do? The very God that could help, they turn against. So that's something that's revealing their heart. Well, what their heart is saying. This is how they view it. They get angry at God. You see, people say, I'm angry at God." Whenever when I hear that phrase, and I can say this now in a very generic way, so let me assure you, I would not say this while a person is going through their grief, unless they just kept pushing it. Okay. But, under the guidelines of being compassionate, doing sometimes grief, you just let people air, okay, vent. But oftentimes, people will get angry at God. And I would say this, first of all, God doesn't care about your anger. You're not moving God by your anger. He doesn't care about your anger. Now, God is compassionate. He is always merciful. But when you square up against God in an arrogant way, then no, God, He's not going to be moved by that. And oftentimes it shows the arrogance of the person who claimed to be angry at God. I'm angry at God. Now just stop. God, right? The creator of the universe, the one who created you. You feel you have the audacity that I could put my thumb my nose, give God the middle finger. I'm angry at God. Well, as I said, thank God He is merciful. But also remember, you're usually thumbing your nose up at God in a situation you cannot control, you cannot fix, you cannot change. So again, the ungodly heart comes out. We read this with King Zedekiah when in the anguish of his heart he comes to Jeremiah while Jeremiah is arrested, and says, "Is there a word of the Lord?" And then when Jeremiah gives him the word of the Lord, he still rebels against God in his sinful nature. So my point is, sometimes all that only brings out sin. Sometimes becomes exceedingly sinful, and that sometimes you would think that people would humble themselves before God, and then the reality is they don't, because what's in their heart will always come out. So let's bring this up. Um, one of the things, and I wanted to go back to, this is Lamentations chapter 3. I'm going to pick it up at verse 40 because I want to, all along we've been looking at the anguish side, right? The fact that, oh God, you are afflicting us. In your anger, Lord, you have brought this great disaster. And in some cases, we have deserved it. You have brought this great disaster because of our sin. So they acknowledge this. They acknowledge this. And then, so, but in the midst of this, because if you kind of go back here, verse 40, he says, well, let me kind of go back and read this. There's something I wanted to read. All right, I'm going to pick it up at verse 31. He says, for the Lord will not reject us forever. Now, this is kind of a hope in the midst of their, remember, in the midst of their suffering. In the midst of the suffering that was caused by God, which came because of their sin, right? He says, for the Lord will not reject us forever. So you can go back and say, well, why did the Lord reject us? So he says, verse 32, even if he causes suffering, he will show compassion. This is amazing right here, because when people get angry at God or they curse God, you're cursing the very lifeline, okay? Your very lifeline. He said, even if he causes suffering, he will show compassion according to his abundant, faithful love. And then he says he does not enjoy bringing affliction or suffering on mankind. He doesn't enjoy this. So in other words, that's why I said before, there is this mischaracterization of God, of the angry God, as opposed to the angry God because he is bringing justice. Okay? In other words, he did not create man to destroy him. He didn't create man to that way he can say, "Ooh, I have objects of my wrath." But he is always responding to the unrepentant, the sinfulness, the ungodly heart. But notice what he says right here. He is abundant. He does not enjoy bringing affliction. And I said this before. You go back through the history when Israel would fall. And remember, they always fell because of their sinfulness. And sometimes whether it's the Philistines or the Assyrians who would brutally afflict them, that would touch God's heart. God would relent, and God would say he would just, okay, and he would raise up a deliverer to deliver them, because the Bible, and one scripture it even says that God could no longer bear seeing his people suffer. So it says right here, he does not enjoy bringing affliction on. He does not enjoy bringing affliction or suffering on mankind. Verse 34, crushing all the prisoners of the land beneath one's feet, denying justice to a man in the presence of the Most High. He says, or suppressing a person's law. So the Lord does not approve of these things. Who is there who speaks and it happens unless the Lord has ordained it? Does not both adversary and good come from the mouth of the Most High? Why should any living person complain? Why should any living person complain, any man, because of the punishment for his sins? Right? So why would you complain about the punishment for, get this, your sins? Now, if you think you don't deserve punishment, if you think you don't deserve judgment, okay? Well, first of all, we have to look at who is the what is the standard we go by? Notice this: why should any living person complain because of the punishment for sins? Right. Well, first of all, so we have to establish. So who determines what right and wrong are? What is the standard of it? Well, God, because God created us. God is the one who created This is his creation, his sandbox, his right. So when God says this is what sin is, now that's why when you violate that, you answer to the Creator. You answer to the one that can make you answer to Him. You answer to the person who can make you answer to Him. Okay? Why should any living person complain, or any man, for the punishment of his sins? And then he goes on and says this: let us search out and examine our ways and turn back to the Lord. So this is, again, so now we come to another side where a person says, I deserve suffering. But notice he says, let us search out and examine our ways. And the fact that he can say that, watch this, and turn back to the Lord, here's the blessing, that you can turn back to the Lord. That's the blessing. God is always merciful. So God is not hardened. That's what I'm saying. God is not, he's not hardened. We can turn back to him. This is how God has presented himself, that he is merciful. Verse 40. Again, let us search out and examine our ways and turn back to the Lord. Let us lift up our hearts and our hands to the God of heaven. We have sinned and rebelled. You have not forgiven. Then he says, Samach. You have covered yourself in anger and pursued us. You have killed without compassion. You have covered yourself with a cloud so that no prayer can pass through. You have made a disgusting filth among us. Now, remember, I actually said this and said that, well, one of the reasons you see this here is that when you get to this place right here and God is not answering your prayers, let's not forget, before you got to this place, you were rejecting God's plea to turn from your sin, to turn from your evil. And so now that you're in this situation, no, God has disconnected his phone, or he's blocked you. God has blocked you. He's put you on block. He's blocked you. P, all our enemies open their mouths against us. We have experienced panic and pitfall, devastation and destruction. My eyes flow with streams of tears because of the destruction of my dear people. Ayin. My eyes overflow unceasingly without end until the Lord looks down from heaven and sees. My eyes brings me grief because of the faith of all the women in the city. Said. For no apparent reason, my enemies hunted me like a bird. They dropped me alive into a pit and threw stones at me. Water flooded over my head, and I thought I'm going to die. Now remember all of these imageries here. During this day, they could relate to them. If you would use the same imagery, if you would use imagery today, you would probably use something more modern, gunfire, bombs, right? Water flooded over my head, and I thought I'm going to die. A cough. I called on your name, Yahweh, from the depths of the pit. You heard my plea, did not ignore my cry for relief. You came near when I called on you. You say, do not be afraid, Resh. You defend my cause, Lord. You redeem my life. Lord, you see the wrong done to me. Judge my case. You see all of the malice, all the plots against me. And then shin. Okay. Lord, you hear their insults, all the plots against me, the slander and murmurings of my opponents. Attack me all day long. When they sit and when they rise, look, I am mocked by their songs, Tav. Lord, you will pay them back what they deserve, Lord, according to the work of their hand. You will give them a heart filled with anguish. May your curse be upon them. You will pursue them in anger and destroy them under your heavens. So, uh, um, what would be worse if, when you're going through some of your hard times, people are mocking you? Think about that for a moment. What would be worse? Um, Now, in this case here, in this case, we're talking about, now I could say, like Jacob, my sufferings have been few and far between. I have had some, but I could tell you sometimes people could be cruel when you are going through. Like, they could take the most inopportune time to insult you, slander you. I've had pastors who thought they were hurting me, but one, in a sense, because I left his church, but would take every opportunity sometimes that he could to insult me. Um, and I think about that. I think about that. Um, and sometimes I would, I can remember being in a position that I could get this person back. It's amazing that there are people that would. I can remember even with the death of my first wife, that one pastor said took the opportunity. Literally, we're talking about the day after. My wife died on a Friday, and so Saturday we're making funeral arrangements. We were there, and he just started laying into me, and I thought, I didn't. Even I was too numb to be offended by it. In other words, thinking about it later. I go, man, that was bogus. But it shows you sometimes the callousness of people, and that's what he's expressing here. How people are rejoicing. He's expressing the thoughts. How people rejoice over your downfall. And watch this, even if you deserve it. And as I said before, I don't see that as a godly characteristic. I remember when there was one brother who should always take the opportunity to insult me in front of people. Now, here's the interesting thing. I knew his pastor, and I knew, and one time I was in the presence. I mean, I could have just. I used to grit my teeth, like I could tell on this guy, because the very guy that was insulting me was an adulterer. And it's kind of funny because everybody in the job knew about it, but here this person was a minister in their church, and they knew him. They kind of esteemed this guy. I didn't. I didn't. I didn't. And because my kind of thing is always this: I'll let God deal with the person, because you never know what plans God has for that person. Just like God had mercy on me, right? And as it turns out, a lot of times this particular person that I'm thinking about, to my knowledge, he grew and was very useful to that church. And so it wasn't my case to try to destroy him. Because if I had did that, I would have been doing that out of spite, out of malice. And then, no. So a lot of times people may think, yeah, but he kind of prospered, did he not? He prospered. Um, he prospered in spite of that. Wouldn't you want to see him suffer? No, because we all could be that way. We could all be exposed. We all need mercy. We all need mercy. We all need mercy. All right, guys. Look, don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP, the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome, and I'll see you in the next study.